So I've been informed that I should watch this and share my thoughts on it. So we're just going in blind and we're just going to talk and see where it goes, right? So this is Sargon of Akkad talking about the death of the orc. I think this is my first video of him that I'm watching.
There have been some frankly preposterous recent developments in the world of Dungeons and Dragons that are revealing even for people who are not interested in this geeky hobby. You are probably aware that D&D is a tabletop role-playing game
No, I've actually never heard of D&D at all, ever, not once in my life.
where a group of friends use a rule set to explore a fantasy world originally based loosely on Tolkien. D&D inherited the classic conceptions of fantasy humans, elves, and dwarves from Lord of the Rings, as well as their traditional enemy, the orc. Tolkien's orcs were intrinsically evil, and that is how Dungeons and Dragons also represented them.
Iffy, right? See, the way that the orcs were represented in Lord of the Rings is not just intrinsically evil, it introduced them as an artificially created race. They weren't natural to Middle Earth, right? They were created by Sauron by corrupting the elves specifically. This was the same way that he created trolls and pretty much all of his other species, such as the trolls. They're corruptions of the Ents, by the way.
Traditionally, they were chaotic evil, the
Yes.
worst and most unpredictably savage of the alignments.
Again, iffy, right? Because while a chaotic evil creature will kind of just run at you with an axe and kill you, a lawful evil creature will, trick you into selling off your soul and damn you for eternity, and a neutral evil will just, do whatever. Overall, what I'm trying to get at here is just like the evil alignments are all evil, the good alignments are all good, and the neutral alignments are all neutral, right? Like, let's not pretend like chaotic evil is somehow like worse than the others. It's not. It's the same.
Though they had what we call sapience, they were congenitally violent, delighted by plunder and rapine, and in every case an irredeemable brute.
Again, not true, right? Because see, the society of orcs was chaotic evil. This is because they lived in a culture that was built upon the worship of the evil god Grumsh, which is actually very heavily based off of Odin. He's blind in one eye, he uses a spear, I think he's got a raven companion, and he's very warmongering. He actually wants his sons to go out and raid and pillage and take from the other races whatever it is that they can. And you very much see that the reason why Grumsh wants this is not just, oh, he's evil. He is evil, don't get me wrong. But his hatred of the other races actually comes from the fact that he was tricked by the elven gods specifically. He was tricked by Corellon, the main deity of the elves, into allowing elves to take first pick of where to live. And so, of course, Corellon said, all right, we'll live here, 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 and here. And what did that leave? It left caves, it left... he said he wanted to live in the plains and the forests and everywhere that there was life. And that left the orcs to live in the deserts, in the caves, and in all the places that had no life. This angered Grumsh greatly, and so Grumsh basically reprogrammed the orcs to just hate everything and everyone. However, there are plenty of situations of orcs, although in a minority, where, they kind of don't want to fight everybody. They're kind of just doing their own thing. If I'm not mistaken, the Uthgard in the Forgotten Realms setting are a relatively friendly tribe of barbarians that have quite a few orcish members. And they're mostly chaotic good / chaotic neutral. They lean there. Not that many of them are chaotic evil. Orcs in general are evil when they are in large groups, orcish tribes who worship, the Grumsh and the other orc gods.
As it was in Lord of the Rings, it became in Dungeons and Dragons. The heroes slay orcs in a copious and morally uncomplicated fashion because they are orcs.
Well, no. It's not because they're orcs, it's because the orcs are attacking the heroes. or because the orcs are attacking the city that the heroes come from. Again, it's almost never a the heroes attack the orcs first. The reason why the orcs are bad is not because they're orcs. It's the orcs are bad because of the things that they're doing. I feel like there's a bit of a misunderstanding here.
Slaying orcs is, in fact, part of what makes the heroes heroic.
What? No. What are you talking about? That's no. No, 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 no. No, no. We're not just gonna sit here and say that, oh yeah, you're a good guy because you killed the orcs. No, dude. That's not why you're a good guy. You're not a good guy because you killed the orcs. You're a good guy because you got in the way of a marauding savage that is trying to hurt innocent people. That's why you're the good guy. You're the good guy because you saved the innocent people, not because you killed the raider, right? Not because you killed the monster. If you can get the monster to just go away, that's even better, right? Like if you could make it go away forever. Like, hey, just leave these people alone. These people are just trying to do their own thing, just trying to live. Go live your own life. Don't come in here and attack us. That's what being good is, right? If you're killing orcs just because they're orcs, you're the exact same as them, right? Like because orcs want to kill elves, not for territory, not for anything else, but because they're elves. Because, Corellon wronged Grumsh. And so the orcs were reprogrammed to kill elves. Yes, we're ignoring 5th edition lore changes because they're stupid. And also, I know more D&D lore than Wizards of the Coast. But overall, that doesn't mean that killing the orcs is righteous just by itself. It's not. You're killing things. You're killing sapient things. The killing of a sapient creature is always a terrible thing, no matter what the situation is. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes if that sapient creature is coming at you with an axe and the only way that you have to stop them is to kill them, yes, you have to do that. Because if you don't, it's going to kill you, and then it's going to kill the people that you're trying to protect. That's why you're a hero. It's because you're the barrier, not just because you're killing the orc. This is a very weird take.
Nobody thought too much about this for a long time.
I mean, because it's a very simple thing, right? The orcs are attacking the other people, or the orcs, or the goblins, or the bugbears, or the whatever, right? Like, name the evil fantasy race, right? But they're not evil because they're orcs and goblins. They're evil because of the things that they do.
But in recent years, very woke people took control of the Dungeons & Dragons franchise.
Not that recent.
And was saddled with the moral quandary of the orc. The woke progressive is what philosopher Michael Oakeshott would call a rationalist, which
A rationalist?
he describes as thus.
That doesn't sound
The
like a bad thing.
rationalist stands for independence of mind on all occasions, for thought free from obligation to any authority save the authority of reason.
That's a good thing, right? You can reason that different creatures have different impulses, and so therefore, if you rationalize things properly, you realize that, like that I don't know, what? Wouldn't a rationalist come to the conclusion that, oh, okay, orcs are different? Like, if the only obligation you have in your thought is reason, you will reason that, okay, like, orcs are fine the way they are because they're different from humans. They're not even humans. There's a reason why they are called orcs and not humans, right? Because they're not humans. But continue.
His circumstances in the modern world have made him contentious. He's the enemy of authority, of prejudice, of the merely traditional, customary, or habitual. His mental attitude is at once sceptical and optimistic. Sceptical because there is no opinion, no habit, no belief, nothing so firmly rooted or so widely held that he hesitates to question it and to judge it by what he calls his reason.
Yeah, that's a good thing, I think. Like, the skepticism is good. You should look at things that are pre-established and go, why is it established this way? And you should look at it both based on why it was established back then and why it's still established today, right? Don't just go, oh, this has been here for a very long time. This bridge has been here and nobody's crossed this bridge, so we're just going to burn this bridge, right? Like, no. Don't do that. Look at the bridge and go, okay, this has been here a long time. Why was this built? Oh, because of, sometimes when there is, a tragedy, for example, we need to cross this bridge. So this bridge needs to be here. Otherwise, when things go wrong, a lot of people are going to die. So this bridge better stay here, and it better stay in good repair. That's a skeptic. That's a rational skeptic, I guess. A stupid skeptic, I would say irrational, but the lack of intelligence does not necessarily mean the lack of rationality. And having the wrong rationality doesn't necessarily make you irrational, it just makes you stupid. A stupid skeptic would just go, well, this bridge hasn't been used in a while, burn.
Optimistic, because the rationalist never doubts the power of his reason to determine the worth of a thing, the truth of an opinion, or the propriety of an action.
That's what? Like, okay. Okay, so it's meant as an oxymoron. All right. I would consider myself skeptical and optimistic, but it's not in the sense of like my own thinking. Like I'm skeptical even towards my own thinking. Otherwise, how the hell can you improve your own thinking if you're not skeptical about it? But at the same time, how the hell are you going to just assume you're always right while also being a skeptic?
Moreover, he is fortified by a belief in a reason common to all mankind, a common power of rational consideration, which is ground and inspiration of argument. Besides this, which gives the rationalist a touch of intellectual equalitarianism, he is also something of an individualist, finding it difficult to believe that anyone who can think honestly and clearly will think differently from himself.
Yeah, anybody who thinks that everybody other than himself thinks the exact same way has no rationale whatsoever because they have never once actually looked at action, consequence, and the result of that consequence. So, action, consequence, and reaction in an honest way. Like, from the moment that you look at history, right, you very quickly realize that, oh, these people are different from me. They had different impacts on their lives, different inspirations, different art pieces that they created. They had different reasoning behind their actions. They had different views on their own religion than what we do. They would look at the exact same piece of paper with the exact same text on it, and they would have a completely different opinion regarding that piece of text, even if they had like upper middle class, whatever you call it, like same as you, if you're upper middle class and somebody was upper middle class 200 years ago, completely different people, right? So I mean, I feel like as soon as you have this opinion, you're no longer rational at all. So I guess the rationalist term is irrational by itself. Is that what that means? I guess.
I'm sure that there will be many of you for whom this paragraph instantly calls to mind concrete individuals who
Hmm. Do I know anybody who's like that? Two people. I don't talk to them anymore.
accurately represent this type. To these people, the freedom and satisfaction of the individual's consciousness is the highest good, and all ends of life must be turned towards achieving it. Each of them considers themselves a rational moral legislator in the Kantian kingdom of ends.
Every rational being must regard himself as giving universal law through the maxims of his will as a member of a realm of ends. Realm of ends is the systematic union of various rational beings through common laws. Paul Guy's interpretation act only on those maxims that could be given by all human wills as part of a complete system of maxims. What the fuck is a maxim? A short, pithy statement expressing general truth or rule of conduct. Oh, okay, so stuff like stealing is bad, killing is bad. Okay, understandable.
As every sapient
That's basically what the alignment says system of D&D is based on, right? Like you've got like killing, stealing is evil, bad. Therefore, if you do it a lot, you're lower down. Violence against others, bad. Protecting others, good. Yeah, yeah, okay.
being is and ought to be, where we can, supposedly, through the power of our calculating mind alone, break free of the pre-rational world and into the purported final stage of humanity's existence.
The idea that we were ever pre-rational is kind of, I mean, I guess when we were fucking pre-homo habilis, I guess. But you know, the idea that we were ever irrational as of recorded history is ridiculous in all aspects of it. You just have to look at the fact that we created farms, we created housing, like even as early as even before recorded history, we had this stuff. We know because, we found evidence of it, right? So the very concept of a pre-rational existence for the human race is very stupid.
The formula for Kantian moral legislation is simple. What is moral is that which can be made into a universal rule that all reasonable minds would consent to follow.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
For example, thou shalt not steal is indeed a rule that all could agree with. Even the thief knows he ought not to steal and would not wish to be stolen from. What makes the thief bad is that he knows what he has done is wrong and yet has done it anyway.
That's a very eloquent way of putting it. I probably could not have put it as eloquently.
Woke morality is fundamentally predicated on the following three propositions. 1. The consciousness is...
I understand that this is going to lead back to orcs, but it's kind of weird that we're talking about woke morality and its composition in a video about the death of the orc, right?
self-determining. 2. Morality is a rational construct. 3. All rational agents are fundamentally the same.
I agree with consciousness being self-determining, right? Because, or does this mean that, because the way I see it, like only somebody who is conscious can determine that they are conscious. Like if you're unconscious, you lack the consciousness to determine anything, right? So the very fact that you can determine consciousness makes you conscious. Does that make sense? As for morality being a rational construct, you can rationalize morality, but if you over-rationalize it, is when you're kind of taking away from the very concept of morality itself, right? Like you can talk about the complications of morality. Like for example, oh my God, I'm buying this belt buckle, right? Oh, but you didn't know kids worked on that, and they were slaves, so you're actually evil because you did that. No, you're only responsible for the moral decisions that you consciously make, and sure, we can reasonably make, because otherwise there is no choice. You're not making a choice, right? If you're making a choice, you're making a moral decision. You can only make a moral statement through decisions. Like you have two buckles, right? One is a little bit worse, or not, one is outright worse, right? It does its job, but it's worse. It's not as pretty, it's not as fancy, same price, right? But this belt buckle, really fancy, really pretty, really ornate, made with child slavery. $2, €2, whatever your currency is. A reasonable price. Very, very reasonable price. Very good price for something so pretty. This belt buckle, kind of shitty, kind of basic. It's just a belt buckle. It holds up your pants. But some dude made this. Like a dude made this, and he's selling it to, pay for his own food, to support his family. Which one do you buy? This is a moral decision if you're aware of the situation. If you go this one, you're making a bad decision. You're making an evil decision because you are choosing to support a business that thrives off of slavery and evil done onto others. Buy this one, and now you're actually supporting somebody worth supporting. You're supporting somebody who wants to support his family. It's as simple as that, right? That you have to make a decision in order for it to have moral impact. As for all rational agents being fundamentally the same, if you believe that, you're just an idiot.
All other aspects of wokeness flow from these, and we see them manifested in all of their activism. Why do they promote transgenderism? Because they can't stand the thought of a rational agent being marginalised and rendered as other due to something beyond their control. In this case, their will being trapped in the wrong body.
I I always think that's weird, like bringing in transgender people into an argument that isn't really about them. I can see why he did it, but I still think it's weird because it doesn't really have anything to do with this, does it?
How can a man become a woman? Well, because everything a woman does can be identified through observation, abstracted into a doctrine, and then consciously mimicked by a man. Therefore,
I mean, no. No, 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 no. You I know this is going to get me hate, but you can't really become a woman. You can't, right? If you're a man, you can't fully become a woman. That's why we call it a trans woman. You are transitioning, or you have fully transitioned into what you would consider to be a woman. And sure, out of politeness, we refer to these people as she, her, right? It's a politeness that you are doing to this person because they would prefer to be called as such. It is the same way as you would call somebody by a nickname rather than by their actual legal name. But at the same time, that person is never fully the other thing. That's why they're transgender and not just a woman, right? Like, and the idea that based on that you should hinder the group that the new person is trying to join is quite ridiculous. But yeah, I don't see why they needed to be brought up here.
behold a woman. Why are they for open borders? Well, because the foreigners, who are rational agents just like us, want to come here, and therefore their simple desire is enough to warrant letting them in. How do we know that our magic soil will make them like us? Because we can just explain our moral conduct to them, and they will be forced by our mighty logic to understand and agree with it.
It's a sheltered point of view. Again, sheltered point of view doesn't really have much to do with the topic of the video that I wanted to see, but I understand where he's coming from, and I can see the point that he's trying to make. The point he's trying to make is that the ideal of woke morality is in fact immoral. The ideal that you can just change somebody's perspective by explaining your perspective to them and assume that all of the pressures that have been put on them throughout their life to, mold them a certain way, from culture to religion to societal law to just societal interaction, will lead them all to the same direction as you just because they had one conversation with you. It's completely ridiculous. It does require a large level of cope. Let's continue.
Because what possible objection could they have? Etc., etc., etc.
Well, it just comes down to the idea. Like, for example, Europe and America, less so America actually. Europe has been facing a lot of Arabic immigration, and there's been a lot of rising crime rates because of it, and it's because of exactly this, right? They come from a place with religious, cultural, and societal laws that differ so greatly from our own that they are essentially incompatible. And it does come down to the fact that their laws were built up by their religious leaders the same way that ours were so long ago, right? With one difference. We have had hundreds upon hundreds of years to mold those laws to be more accepting of society. We wanted to create a society that was accepting, that was merciful, that took pity on the weak, and treated them as best we could. That is the society that we wanted. And that is the society that here in Europe we have molded. And so that's why we accepted them to come here. Unfortunately, they have created a society where they believe that a gay person should be put to death. A woman is not a full person. And other laws that, have less of an impact on this culture shock, But a lot of the crime rate comes from that very big differentiation. And it's why it's very important to ensure that only the people who are willing to actually be integrated can be allowed through. Because some people will. And it's why it's important to establish that there are cultural differences.
These are the chains of reasoning that they adopt to arrive at any of their conclusions, as fundamentally they approach each subject with the aim of creating as little discomfort for anyone's consciousness as possible. To them,
No, 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 no. That's fake. Actually, that's not true. The woke individual, as he has been referring to them as, is okay with creating discomfort for one group of people, and that is the people that he has deemed to be the oppressors, which are the exception to this rule, right? The rational agent that has been deemed as the oppressor is not fundamentally the same as the rational agent that has been deemed the oppressed, which is why so many people who identify by these ideologies tend to want to marginalize themselves, right? Whether through belonging to a minority group or something like that. Like, for example, I've met people who claim to be transsexual and yet don't want to transition. They still identify with the pronouns of their birth, and they don't do anything, right? Like, it's a man who claims to be a trans woman, but prefers to be referred to as a he, wears man's clothes, doesn't do makeup or anything like that, does nothing, right? They only identify as trans for the purpose of being a part of the minority group so that they can be an oppressed individual rather than the oppressor. Why? Because the oppressor is not fundamentally the same as the others. The oppressor is evil, and therefore any action that you do upon them is justified. Therefore, it is okay to take from the oppressor, which is usually just shorthand for the largest group or the most powerful group, whether or not they're in the right, whether or not they're in the wrong.
it is preferable to recreate all of reality than to be forced to change their mind. Which is why woke people can't stand the presence of the orc. From the woke perspective, the orc as a race is probably...
Finally, we are getting to what we wanted to talk about in this video. Right? Why Wizards of the Coast wanted to change the orcs.
problematic in the following ways. 1. Orcs are a universally evil, sapient creature.
This is already fake, by the way. Orcs are not universally evil. Orcs are generally evil. Why? Because of their culture, their religion, and their society.
2. This evil is an intrinsic part of the orc's biological nature.
Again, not biological. It's cultural. It's because their god is evil, and their god wants them to be evil. That's it. It's as simple as that. It's not biological. It's cultural.
3. Orcs, therefore, are fundamentally different to other sapient creatures.
Yes, because they have different impulses and pressures and societal, religious, and cultural norms. Elves are different from other sapient creatures in fantasy. So are dwarves, halflings, gnomes, etc., etc., etc. And once you look at their, biology and society, you realize why they are different and why they are the way that they are, right? Humans are short-lived compared to pretty much all other races, right? With the exception of orcs and goblins. Orcs and goblins are actually not as long-lived as humans. Humans live to about 80, orcs live to about 50. Very big deal, especially considering those last 10 to 15 years, you're kind of fucked. So really, orcs live to about 35 before they start to lose the thing that makes them, good members of society. Kind of the same thing for goblins, I think. I don't know how long goblins live. I think it's less than humans. But for example, elves so long lived that they're kind of lazy. They kind of just mind their own business. They stay in their own lane, don't really do much of anything until something comes to them. Dwarves, very short, stout, very community driven, very lawful. They work, 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 work. Amazing work ethic, right? Gnomes, very short, very small, very intelligent. And because they're so intelligent, they want to do things. They want to create. They want to do all sorts of things. In Pathfinder, they're actually fake creatures. And if they don't go out and experience things and create things and do all of this... I touched the mic. Sorry, my bad. If they don't go out and do all of these things, they actually literally die. Halflings, yeah, they're just chill dudes, man. They just trying to vibe.
The orc, if he has anything we could call morality at all, has a partial morality. That is, to the orc, his morality is partial to what serves his interests and desires, and what is wrong is anything that inhibits or hurts them. Whether you are a rational animal or not is irrelevant to the orc's violent pursuit of pleasure and glory, and though he might understand your arguments against committing atrocities, he does not consider his fellow rational beings to be a part of his own moral constituency.
I mean, at the same time, humans, we don't consider orcs to be a part of our moral constituency, right? Because for us, good is when you are able to, raise your family, help the society around you, and just overall live a happy and satisfying existence, right? That is a good human. A good human raises his family, helps his community, and just overall is a positive influence on the world, right? And for an orc, a good orc is somebody who goes out, rapes, pillages, murders his enemies, and then comes back, takes all the women, takes all the riches, and fuck, yeah, right? That's a good orc. For us to establish our own thing, we also have to be, against them. We have to treat them as others because they are. They are a different species. They have different interests, different impacts, and they behave differently.
To the orc, slaughtering you and your family and then taking everything you have is completely justifiable, laudable, and the source of his social status.
Yes.
And don't take my word for it. This is how they have always been defined in Dungeons and Dragons,
yes,
until very recent time.
But the thing that I think Sargon is missing here is that what he is describing is not a biological impulse. I mean, it can be biological, right? Like you can be more violence prone, all of these things, sure, and they are. But they are described as such, I mean. But what he's describing is a cultural impulse.
Take this excerpt from the 3.5 edition Monster Manual, for example. Orcs believe that to survive, they must conquer as much territory as possible, which puts them at odds with all intelligent creatures that live near them. They are constantly warring with, or preparing to war with, other humanoids, including other orc tribes. They can ally with other humanoids for a time, but quickly rebel if not commanded by orcs. Their deities teach them that all other beings are inferior, and that all worldly goods rightfully belong to the orcs, having been stolen by others.
It's that thing I talked about with Grumsh being tricked by Corellon, right? Because the orcs were very much capable of kind of like occupying the entire surface world, and Corellon thought, okay, if I allow this, pretty much every other race is going to be pushed out. So I'm going to take all of this territory. I'm going to trick him into letting me take the territory, and because he agreed to it, he can't go back on his word. That's just how important lawful contracts are in D&D. It's like, well, you signed right here. You signed right here. You can't do nothing about it, buddy. You signed right here. You fucked, right? But yeah, and this is actually kind of why the elven gods are considered chaotic good, because most of them are not above lying to you for the good of everybody around you, including yourself. They will do this for your own good, right? Because Corellon understood that if the orcs were allowed to live amongst everywhere else and they were able to take over everything, eventually the other races are going to wipe them out. And Corellon looked at that and said, okay, the orcs are hardy, they're tough, they can survive in the deserts and in the caves. So that's where you're going to go. Because you can survive there, you can thrive there. Everybody else needs this space to thrive, and so that's where we're going to go. We're always going to have conflict, but this way the conflict won't end with anybody getting wiped out.
Orc spellcasters are ambitious, and rivalries between them and warrior leaders sometimes tear a tribe apart.
Every spellcaster is ambitious. This is why I fucking hate mages. Everybody should hate mages because mages are pieces of fucking shit.
Orc society is patriarchal. Females are prized possessions at best and chattel at worst. Male orcs pride themselves on the number of females they own and male children that they sire, as well as their battle prowess, wealth, and amount of territory. They wear their battle scars proudly and ritually scar themselves to mark significant achievements and turning points in their lives.
Honestly, that last part's pretty based. The whole wearing battle scars proudly.
The chief orc deity is Gramush, a
Grumsh.
one-eyed god who tolerates no sign of peaceability amongst his people.
Yes, Grumsh actively incentivizes conflict amongst the orcs as well.
It's
He believes it makes them stronger, which it does.
fairly easy to see why a woke progressive takes issue with the orc at this point. It boils down to a fairly simple and intuitive conclusion that normal people wouldn't take issue with. It is rational to be racist against orcs. They are, after all, monsters.
No. No, because the idea of racist. Actually, hold on. Characterized by or showing prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular race or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. Person who is prejudiced against or antagonistic towards people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is minority or marginalized. Okay, so in this case, orcs are not minority or marginalized. However, we are being racist against them, yes. I do hate that they added that last bit, the typically against the minority or marginalized, because you do not need to be that to be racist. Like, you can be racist against the established race in any given setting, right? Like, if you're in America and you hate white people, congratulations, you're racist against white people. If you're in Africa and you hate black people, congratulations, you're racist against black people, right? It doesn't matter how much of a minority or marginalized group the person you're talking about is. If you hate them on the basis of race, yes, you are a racist. So, okay. I was under the impression that racism required an irrational prejudice or what's the word I'm looking for? An inappropriate? No, that's not the word. An uncalled for prejudice, I guess. Something that doesn't make sense, doesn't make logical sense. But no, yes, in this case, yes, it is logical to show prejudice and dislike orcs based on the fact that they are orcs, because, hey, it's their culture. If you find an orc that has been part of an orcish tribe his entire life, yeah, you're most likely going to be in a fight for your life because that orc is coming at you with an axe.
And not people. That's why they're in the monster manual and not the player's handbook.
They are people, however. They are technically people. That's why killing them is still a, shame. It's a bad thing to have to do it.
They are monsters smart enough to craft and use weapons.
But, yeah, they're monstrous. They're monstrous, not monsters, I think. Like, I think to be a monster, you have to be, like, actual full monster, right?
Cooperative enough to form war bands and armies, and forward-thinking enough to be able to even create plans with which to accomplish their goals.
Yeah.
But they are monsters, nonetheless.
Yes.
However, they aren't monsters to progressives.
I don't consider orcs, like, full-on monsters. Like, I would sooner consider a giant fucking Siberian tiger a monster before I would consider an orc a monster, right? Like, I feel like to be considered a monster is to be just physically so powerful that you're not even rational anymore. You're just going around with the physicality of your form, just destroying anything that gets in your way, preying on anything, preying on actual societies and right? Because the orcs do have a society. They are people, right? They're not human, they're not elves, they're not dwarves, they're not, gnomes, but they are different. They are violent, they are savage, they are ruthless, and they are vicious, and they need to be stopped from destroying the other races. That does not mean that killing them is by itself a righteous thing, but it is sometimes necessary when they are attacking you, because they are orcs, and orcs are violent. Simple as that, right? To go so far as to say they aren't people, though, I think that would imply that they are incapable of, society, right? And they aren't.
The moral constituency of progressives does not consist of biological beings of the same type, but instead It is any creature that is capable of grasping a rational argument. The progressive
Yes, that is the definition of a person, right? Like it's a like we can look at the definition of person, right? A human being regarded as individual, a category used in the classification of pronouns, possessive determiners, and okay, never mind. So this says human being, but in this case it would just be a being regarded as an individual. I think the existence of human here is because the only person on Earth is going to be human, right? That's the only type of people.
is therefore naturally inclined to prevent the orc from being marginalized, and attempt to bring them into their kingdom of ends, and make of the orc a rational legislator like themselves.
But that doesn't work because the orc would not want to, right? Um, Orcs are just naturally violent, savage. They're given to physical forms of existence. Their entire race and religion and culture is aimed towards war.
Moreover, the woke progressive is very concerned about representation, and can't help but find inappropriate analysis
I'm not gonna pause throughout most of this segment. I'm fairly certain of it. I'm just gonna say, if you think orcs are representative of any human society ever, you're a fucking idiot. And you're racist to boot. And if you think that they are black, you're even more of an idiot and incredibly ignorant, right? Grumsh himself is based off of Odin. Grumsh, the orc god, is based on Odin. So if we're going to say, if we're going to pretend like, oh, orcs are representative of somebody, they're representative of Norse Vikings and no one else, right?
analogies to people in the real world. When looking at the orc, the progressive outrageously decides that orcs are actually a fantasy representation of black people. Much to the shock of literally everyone, they proceeded to eradicate the traditional concept of the orc on the grounds that everyone else was a racist. As a quick aside, I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons since I was a teenager, and I have not once, in more than 30 years of playing, heard anyone draw this comparison.
I've heard one person draw that comparison. And after 5 minutes of talking, they were allowed into the group, right? Before they revealed that they were a fucking retard. And after 5 minutes of talking about it, everybody was calling them an idiot and they left. And this is a group that has. I'm the DM, I'm the only conservative person in the group.
Normal
There's 5 people.
think that humans of all kinds are represented in Dungeons and Dragons by other humans in every case.
Yep.
Orcs are monsters and are not representative of any humans.
Funnily enough, I think the nation that is supposed to be representative of Africans in D&D are the Chult. And it's such a dangerous place that everybody who comes out of there is like 5 levels higher than the norm. Like it's actually like just a country of superhumans, basically, a nation. Like Chult is just like if you go to Chult and you're a level 10 adventurer in like fucking Baldur's Gate or whatever, and you go to Chult, you're probably gonna die. It's just so fucking dangerous. It's like Australia rolled into Africa. And by Australia, I refer to the wildlife that is just fucking insanely dangerous.
Anyway, the orc presented a double bind for the progressive in the fact that they were congenitally evil. That is, to be evil was a part of their nature,
Yeah.
regardless of what their rational mind could comprehend. This is what they would term biological essentialism, as in, this behavioral expression is a genetically pre-programmed aspect of the orc, which they can never fully break.
Yes, because they were created by intelligent design, unlike in real life where we were created. Well, there are arguments for intelligent design in real life based on, Christianity and stuff, but evolution developed things, right? Whereas in D&D, where things were created by direct intervention of deities, such as the orc, which was created by the intelligent design of Grumsh. Like, for example, just look at Goliaths, right? Male Goliaths don't grow any hair, ever, anywhere. Female Goliaths grow hair. Males don't. Naturally, through evolution, that doesn't happen. When you have intelligent design of an actual god stepping in and doing things to create his own race that is representative of himself or herself, now you do have that.
Orcs will always be a brutish and violent species, and the progressive couldn't stop comparing them to black people, so the orc
Which is still fucking crazy.
had to change. But this does not resolve the
Orcs are human beings who can be slaughtered without conscience or apology is a crazy fucking thing to say, because they're not human.
underlying problem, however. Even if black people did not exist, and the progressive could not identify any real-world analogue for the orc would still present an irresolvable issue to progressive concepts of morality. The woke activists who took over the Dungeons & Dragons franchise found themselves in a quandary. Can there really be permitted to exist such a thing as an intrinsically evil, sapient creature? If the answer is yes, then they are also admitting that the entire progressive worldview is wrong about the nature of morality, rationality, and consciousness.
No, not necessarily. It just means that it applies to humans rather than to fantasy races that don't actually exist.
If the answer is yes, then they admit that a person's consciousness is not a purely rational, self-authored, autonomous creation of their own choosing, and is in fact a product of the biological functions of the body and the inculcation of non-rational habits.
The only person who believes the former is somebody who is blind to the impact of biological form. Like, the fact that they're... And by the way, we have actual IRL evidence to prove that... I keep accidentally going too far over to this side. The only people who believe this are people who have absolutely no context of real life, because we have actual IRL evidence of people changing their behavior to be closer to an organ donor that they never met. Like, somebody gets like a fucking piece of somebody's liver, and all of a sudden they start liking foods that they've never enjoyed before because the other person likes it, and they've never met the other person. So we know that this is a thing, right? We know it's a thing. There's enough evidence to say, oh yeah, this happens. Does it happen all the time? No, not necessarily. Is there a biological driving factor to consciousness? Yes. We can state that, like, directly. We can say, yes, if you are born a certain way with certain impulses in your genetics, you will be philosophically different from somebody who was born with different impulses in their genes and DNA.
If this is the case, then there is no such thing as a universal rational agent.
Of course
and
not.
morality is not simply about rational calculation.
Of course not.
Indeed, older traditional perspectives of morality, which are particular, habitual, and based on deeds, suddenly appear to be much more realistic.
Yes.
And if this is true, then the progressive has to admit that prejudice is, at least in some cases, valid.
Of course it is. I'm prejudiced against poisonous snakes. Venomous, sorry. I'm prejudiced against venomous snakes. I'm prejudiced against tigers. I'm prejudiced against sharks. Most prejudice is extremely valid. Irrational prejudice against regular people who are just trying to live their lives is not. However, if we are talking about a fantasy race of violent, savage, pig monster people, yeah, prejudice is gonna be valid.
If the orc not only won't stop trying...
Like, I'm sorry, if you look at this and see a human, you're fucking cringe. You're fucking weird, dude.
to kill us, but also cannot be reasoned with, nor persuaded to follow a different course of action because its beliefs are a product of its biology, society, and religion, and it's these which drive it towards invasion, then put simply, it is us or them.
Yeah.
And those of us who finally put an end to them are doing something heroic. In this context, not only is the heroism of the hero a valid and necessary thing for human civilization to continue, for the innocent members of our society to live lives of happiness and security, such heroism is also a form of racism. The
Yes.
existence of the orc creates
In this case where we are talking about non-human entities that only care about destroying us, racism is good. Do not clip that.
a context in which racism can be heroic. You can understand why they find this completely unacceptable, and so Dungeons and Dragons has therefore been entirely re-engineered for the modern audience,
Yes.
as this New York Times article from just over a month ago explains to us. In previous editions of D&D, each character type would get certain kinds of racial bonuses and abilities.
I mean, we still get the racial bonuses and abilities, except now you get the ability scoring improvements from background rather than race, which, yeah, okay, fair enough, right? I don't super like it, but I don't mind it as much because it had a good impact on the gameplay of it, right? You can reliably make a warrior gnome, and it's fine, and you can make a mage orc, and it's fine, right? Used to be you'd get a -2 to intelligence from playing an orc, which is like, okay, yeah, I get it, but at the same time, it's kind of shitty because it makes it really hard to play an orc with certain classes, right? And sometimes you want to play an orc mage, even if you're still like an orc, right? So I don't dislike that. I don't dislike that change. I think it's weird that they changed the name from race to species. That's fucking weird. I prefer the way that Pathfinder did it, where it's just called an ancestry, because that way you can say, oh, I'm a human with orcish ancestry, or I'm an orc with elvish ancestry. I've got this and that, and you can mix and match it and create like a thing, right? But at the same time, it's like everybody calls it race. Nobody calls it species. If somebody is at your table and calls it species, you already know that they're a weirdo, right? You already know you can't talk about certain things around them. You already know you're not going to be able to like have an intelligent conversation with that person.
For example, elves got a natural proficiency towards being wizards, whereas half-orcs got an intrinsic negative to their intelligence.
No, orcs did, because half-orcs are actually the best of both worlds. Half-orcs have the intelligence of the other race, which is usually human, and the physicality of an orc. They were usually a little shorter. However, they weren't as bent over. They were like fully like this, so they would actually appear taller. And a lot of the times, half-orcs would actually end up dominating their tribes.
Stat due to their orcish lineage. The characters were based
They were just like stronger and tougher, right? So they were better fighters than barbarians.
in biological
And paladins, funnily enough.
essentialism and were physically different because of their heritage, and this was reflected in their stats.
One thing that I do think is funny is that Wizards of the Coast, by doing this change from race to species, they actually wiped out half races because apparently race mixing is racist.
Races are now species. Some character traits have been divorced from biological identity. A mountain dwarf is no longer inherently brawny and durable.
Which is stupid.
A high elf, no longer intelligent and dexterous.
1 second. Actually, hold on. Hold on. I actually need to verify this thing that they just said. Like, a mountain dwarf is no longer inherently brawny and durable. We're going to verify this, because if by this they mean they no longer get a +2 to strength and +1 to constitution, okay. However, if by this they mean that you no longer get the benefits, oh, there's just no more mountain dwarf. Mountain dwarf no longer exists. Okay, it's just dwarf. Yeah, I wouldn't know. I don't play shorties.
By definition. They want D&D to be woke, and in doing so, they have abandoned all elements of biological differentiation between the player races, which means that each character comes from a universal humanoid type, and not a particular kind of creature. The differences in character stats will now come from their professions.
Yes.
Bards will get a
I don't, and no, it's actually from their background, not their profession. So like if you're a soldier, you have a certain bonus. If you're an entertainer, another bonus, scholar, etc., 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 right? And you can just create your own background, basically. The rules are pretty self-explanatory. But I don't mind that much. I think that that's not a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a little weird. The reason why they did it, right? If it was for a gameplay perspective, I wouldn't mind it, because I don't mind it from a gameplay perspective. But saying that it's for, political ideology, it's cringe. It's fucking weird. It's fucking weird, bro.
charisma bonus, fighters a strength bonus, etc., etc., rendering the different species
Races.
in D&D a superfluous aesthetic choice with no functional distinction.
There is functional distinction. You still have the same abilities. Like I was looking at it here. Like let's look at it right here, right? We've got it. I've got it open right here, right? Let's close this, and this. 5e Tools. My favorite website. It has all the stuff. Please do not use anything that you have not purchased. Dwarf. Dwarven resilience. You have resistance to poison, advantage on saving throws you make to avoid or end the poison condition. Dwarven toughness, +1 hit point each level, and stone cutting. You gain tremor sense as a bonus action. Yeah, see? Biological abilities, right? Same thing for the elf. You got spells here. You got Fey ancestry. You've got keen senses. You've got trans. Gnomes, Goliaths. What the fuck is this? Oh, are Goliaths just straight up half giants now? Huh. Not sure I like that. Anyway, as you can see, there are in fact benefits to being different races, and it's not just an aesthetic choice.
Between them, one of the writers just flat out tells us this.
What they're trying to do here is to put out a signal flare to not only current players but potentially future players that this game is a safe, inclusive, thoughtful, sensitive approach to fantasy storytelling. It always was, and you, Mr. Ryan Lessard, are a goddamn idiot.
This is for inclusivity. What they're
I'm sure your campaigns are garbage.
trying to do here is put up a signal flare to not only current players but potential future players that this game is a safe, inclusive, thoughtful, and sensitive approach to fantasy storytelling.
Yeah, I'm very much certain that Mr. Ryan Lessard, frequent Dungeons and Dragons dungeon master, is trash at dungeon mastering.
They also removed the concept of the half race, such
Inherently racist half-elves and half-orcs. Yeah, if you think mixed races are bad, yeah, I think we've had this conversation like throughout history. Yeah, you're in the wrong.
which is half elves and
Also, why the fuck is Duratan here? Duratan is a full orc. Like Gamora is the half orc. She's half Draenei.
half orcs. Just bluntly putting it, they're racist. And this is not where the half orc
The half construction is inherently racist.
Just bluntly putting it, they're racist. And this is not where the preposterous changes end either. The leash has apparently had its phylactery removed.
What? Calls it a spirit jar. Why? Instead of the Greek word phylactery, which has caused some controversy in the world of entities with tefillin used in Judaism for prayer. Bro, get the fuck out of here. It's a phylactery. Alright? It's called a phylactery because that's what it fucking is. It is an amulet, an object believed to confer protection upon its possessor. Wow. Right? I wanted to actually straight up look at the definition to make sure I wasn't wrong about this. Yeah, it's a protective fucking charm. For the Lich. They put their soul in there.
To avoid offending Jewish people, as everyone recently discovered
I thought woke people hated Jews all of a sudden.
that a phylactery is also apparently something associated with Judaism. The male and female versions of the Sphinx have been abolished to
What? Why? Sphinxes of wonder, secrets, lore, and Why? Multicolored and classified as celestials instead of monstrosities. This change in form and classification reflects more the way sphinxes are depicted in Hinduism and Buddhism rather than the Greek Egyptian influence of previous editions. Why? No mention if they still exist, though they're listed on the conversion tables to be equivalent to the Valor and Lore Sphinxes, respectively. So you're erasing one culture over another, and you think you're the one who is like, you actively made a racist decision here. You have chosen to show prejudice for Greek and Egyptian influence, which they are supposed to have. Like, they're supposed to be the Greek sphinxes, not the Hindu and Buddhist ones. You want to know why? Because the Hindus and the Buddhists, the Eastern people, can make their own game. D&D is European, so it takes influence from European things, European cultures, European mythologies, right? I don't think this is weird at all. Like, no. At my table, there's Andro and Geno Sphinxes. That's it.
create a
Fuck.
gender neutral version, and the orc has been removed from the monster manual and reworked into a playable race to avoid accusations of racism.
Originally, orcs in D&D skewed much closer to traditional fantasy depictions like those in The Lord of the Rings. However, the 2024 Player's Handbook made some major changes to this. Orcs are now depicted as a nomadic race with personalities that range as widely as those of humans or other sentient species in D&D, such as elves. Elves also don't have personalities which range all that widely as humans. They have a personality range, but they are much different from humans. What the fuck? Whereas previous editions allowed players to play as half-orcs, the latest D&D materials enable players to play as full orcs now that they are being depicted more nuanced. You could always play as an orc. As early as first edition, you could play as an orc. You could be an orc. You were an exception. That's it. But you were an orc. You could be as a half-orc as well, but you could be an orc.
The new orcs are apparently just Mexicans.
What? Is he saying that because of the hats? That's just the cowboy hat, bro. That's just because he's outside. I do think this is fucking cringe, though. Like, this is not orc. These aren't orcs at all. They're not even fucking green. Fucking weird, man.
They have been given the same treatment as all of the other races.
Also, are Mexicans even nomadic? What? No. This is clearly like an attempt at doing turning them into Native Americans.
So now they have too been harmonized into a universal humanoid type, which has no essential contradictions with any of the others. The differences between them are arbitrary and aesthetic. They are now just like any other humanoid race. They live, work, love, and raise children in precisely the same way, and so we get precisely the same outcome. They're just like us, and so they're no longer monsters. The problem of homogenizing the orc and reducing him to a mere human type is that there is no longer a conflict of moral visions, and therefore they are no longer even really orcs. In every compelling story, there are competing visions of how the...
And what he said there is actually pretty big, right? Because pretty much everywhere, the term orc, Wikipedia page, an orc, sometimes spelled orc, in J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth fantasy fiction is a race of humanoid monsters, which he also calls goblins. In that case, it's the same thing. But let's see here. We've got fictional monsters and race. We've got orcs here. Character in the work is a single character, so no. Orcs in Warcraft are savage, brutal warriors who struggle against their own nature of savagery through a strict code of honor. Warhammer orcs, we all know what those are like. They're kind of wild. We love them. And then the Elder Scrolls series, they're savage, kind of the same as everybody else, but retaining that savage, violent nature that they struggle against in order to be, a civilized race, right? Yeah, no. The idea that you can't have orcs as a brutal race of vicious marauders because somebody's feelings were hurt, because they identified them as black, like, that just speaks to that person's prejudice.
The world ought to be. These are drawn from situated perspectives and from contradictions between the two opposing parties. The clash of interests is not as interesting as the clash of moralities.
True.
A conflict between competing claims to a resource implies the possibility of a mutually agreed settlement by negotiation, and a room in which lawyers hash out the finer details of a contract. This is an important conflict resolution solution to a well-functioning society, no doubt, but hardly a compelling plot in an adventure game. Moral differences, by contrast, are often irreconcilable. That is, one side either will not or cannot concede to the moral claims of their opponent.
It's why Thanos in the comic books, at least to me, was a lot more interesting, because Thanos in the comic books had one desire. He wanted to woo death. He wanted death to be in love with him. For that purpose, he vowed to wipe out all other living beings, including himself. That's why eventually, when he succeeds, he actually goes back in time, kidnaps himself, and then challenges himself to a fight to the death, and then loses. And then young Thanos looks old Thanos dead in the eye and says, because of this shit, because of how pathetic you fucking look, I vow to never be you again. I vow to not kill everything. And so, old Thanos stops existing when he goes back in time, when he goes back to his own time. And that's a badass scene. It wouldn't be possible with MCU's Thanos. I think MCU's Thanos was much less interesting. The idea that he thought of himself as a good guy was just, right? Like, it turns it into a philosophical fight rather than one where you just have this giant, unstoppable master of technology and magic wiping everything out. And yeah, that's my opinion, right? Also, his weapon was goofy. They should have just given him a flaming sword like he had in the comics.
In such
Surtur's sword. And I'm referring to Old Man Thanos. They should have given him that sword. Absolutely, they should have given him that sword. It's like, oh my god, how did they get that? Oh, he took it from Surtur. Because he stopped at Asgard and fucking killed him.
circumstances, the only
That would have been so badass, right? Like, yeah, he just shows up using Surtur's flaming sword. And it's like, where did he get that? Oh, he stopped at Asgard, killed Surtur, and then moved on to kill us. Like, that'd be badass, right?
recourse for resolution is
What do I know? I'm just a guy.
an appeal to heaven. All of our greatest heroes have been masters of violence in some way, and as much as the concept might be treated with stigma in modernity, we recognize this as a form of heroism when we see it.
Well, yes, because they're using their capacity for violence to defend us from those who use their capacity to violence to harm us.
For example,
It's pretty self-explanatory.
on Westminster Bridge, when members of the public took it upon themselves to subdue a terrorist with a narwhal horn and a fire extinguisher. This was a heroic thing to do, and not
That's badass.
only do we recognize this in reality, we constantly represent it in our fiction. All of our ancient heroes were masters of arms, and the very concept of a superhero is predicated on the fact that they are simply too powerful to be stopped by mortal men. They too resolve their conflicts by force, and we respect the courage and conviction required to brave the pain and potential death that is risked when standing for something we consider to be righteous. The problem of homogenizing the orc and reducing him to a mere human type is that no longer is there a conflict of moral visions. If we recall the previous edition's view of the orc,
That looks fucking sick, I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, that looks sick.
We see that they are biologically and spiritually driven towards conquest and invasion, to kill their neighbours and plunder their wealth, to enslave their own women and use them to breed the next generation of conquerors, to enhance their own status within orc society. This is a moral outlook which is not only completely incompatible with our own, but would destroy us entirely if it were not confronted with force. All heroism is in some way qualified by the knowledge that the issue cannot actually be talked out, and that the issue would have to be resolved in a fight to the death. But if they can be talked out of it, we have reduced the heroic necessity of defeating the orc at all costs to one of ensuring that he can merely be brought to the bargaining table, so that reasonable representatives of both sides can cut a deal. The brutish, bestial horror of the devouring, half-rational, half-animal raider is no longer the threat it once was, because it no longer exists. And thus, the concept of the orc has in fact been removed entirely from Dungeons and Dragons. No longer do orcs get to be authentically what they were, due entirely to the moral prejudices of the woke left, which holds that there is actually only one form of morality, and it is universalist liberalism. The biological nature of the humanoid animal has been eliminated. The essence of each character has been made universal, interchangeable, and boring. If all characters are basically the same, why bother choosing any of them? If all conflicts can be...
Well, because they're not, right? Like, here's the thing. I've yet to be at a table where orcs are interesting and also the same as everybody else, right? No one wants to play as just an orc, right? Unless they want to grapple with that in some way. Like look at literally every depiction of an orc, right? They either grapple with their inherent violence, they grapple with the way everybody else sees them as violent, or they are just violent. Right? Orcs are by definition built for violence, whether that be in the eyes of others, in the eyes of themselves, or just outright fact in fantasy. So the very idea that you have now created a setting where the orcs lack that defining characteristic, then you essentially did create a setting that has no orcs.
Be resolved through negotiation, why bother learning to fight? Ironically,
well, because if you don't, somebody else will, right? Because we do live in a world where that is the case, right? Except, and when I say that is the case, I mean like everybody's just different types of humans, right? Except the very necessity for violence in the real world proves that, yeah, there are things that cannot be pacified without the use of violence. There are situations where violence is the only solution because there are irreconcilable differences.
The drive towards inclusivity has excluded those people who actually wanted to play a more grim, dark, or realistic interpretations of Dungeons and Dragons as a scenario. Personally, as a player and a DM, I love to min-max, and I like to get the most out of the different stats available to me in the different creatures. If they're all basically the same...
They're not all basically the same.
Then my interest in the property goes away entirely, and you've lost me as a player. The removal...
Yeah, that's fair, but the only difference is the ability scores, and you get those from background.
Of racial attributes has indeed liberated the fictional consciousnesses.
You still have feats, you still have other stuff that is unique to the orcs. Yeah.
Of our fantasy races from the material confines of their bodies, and made combat a non-essential aspect of our storytelling, thereby eroding the very nature of heroism in the setting. But does this make Dungeons and Dragons any better?
No, it outright makes it worse.
By making it more liberal. By eliminating...
I mean, and we know that nobody likes liberalism as a moral philosophy. Nobody likes that shit. Nobody cares about that shit. Even liberals don't like it. Because the moment that they are actually met with the consequences of their moral obligations, their moral ideology, the consequences of impinging their morality on the world around them, they immediately crumble and they want to go back. Like it's instantaneous.
Fictional racism, have we made our setting more or less interesting? Are more people choosing to play and finding themselves gripped by their adventures, or are they growing weary of the introduction of excessive moral complexity into their fantasy games? Maybe it's okay to just let us fight some monsters and be the heroes of a fictional story.
I think this video has gone on a little bit too long. We've been at this for about an hour. So, thank you so very much for everybody who is still here. I'm just going to end this with saying that there's a reason they're called monstrous humanoids. There's a reason that they're so popular as an enemy. Because people like having a big, strong enemy that realistically you have no way of beating, right? Orcs are bigger than humans, stronger than humans, more violent than humans, and in most settings, not as advanced, but in some settings, as advanced or more towards war, right? Like in Pathfinder, everybody else is fighting with swords and spears, and orcs just fucking invented miniguns. Kind of crazy, if you ask me. But at the end of the day, oh, and they invented it to fight against undead. Funnily enough, it was just to fight zombies, which is kind of fucking based. They're violent. They're not like fucking crazy savages, but they are violent, and they have their own religion, which I believe is chaotic neutral or chaotic evil, or just overall like warlike. So they are pretty much like always looking for war, regardless. I think that the decision by Wizards of the Coast to just constantly cut down on the flavor of their own setting is stupid. It's nothing else. It's stupid. You're making it so you are alienating people. Because before, it was like, oh, orcs are chaotic evil. They're a little dumber, but they're evil. They're violent. They're strong. They're big. Here's the race. Here's the points. Do with it as you will. This is the setting of Forgotten Realms, right? And then everybody made their own decision. By doing this, what they're doing is they are making the decision for the player. And worse, they're making the decision for the dungeon master. They are taking that away from you by taking him out of the monster manual. And by doing that, they are worsening their game. They are taking steps actively to make their game worse and worse and worse. And they're stupid for it. They're not inclusive because they are excluding. They're not racially informed because the very concept of orcs being equivalent to any human nation is, by itself, incredibly racist. If they are, and the very concept that orcs are based off of anything like a racial minority, such as African people, is, as well, incredibly stupid. Because if they are, in fact, based on any race, they would be based on Norse. Because their god, Grumsh, is Odin. Straight up Odin. He's fucking blind in one eye, has a spear, has a bird, and uses fucking divination magic and trickery and is very warlike, and he only gives you praise and only lets you into heaven if you died fighting. How is that anything other than Odin? Right? Regardless, I hope you guys had a good time. I hope you enjoyed this little deconstruction of the video. I might make more of these if this does well. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one. Cheers.